Thanks the world of you.
Thanks, my pleasure.
All right, 6 o'clock, I'm getting ready to go live on the webinar now. Okay, and you're on.
Participants are joining.
I think Dr. Echols.
Yeah, you told me 6:02, so I'm following orders. Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. My name is Dr. Fredrick Echols, and I'm the Acting Director of Health for the City of St. Louis. We'll start this evening session by having a moment of silence for those individuals who have been directly and indirectly impacted by COVID-19. We also want to spend this time to honor those who have lost their lives due to complications associated with COVID-19. Despite requirements by the federal government to ensure inclusion of women and minorities in all federally funded research, communities of color continue to participate less frequently than Caucasians. Lower participation rates among communities of color have been reported across various study types, which include but are not limited to controlled clinical treatment trials, intervention trials, as well as studies on various diseases and conditions. So the lower participation of communities of color in COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials was not unexpected. Several factors that affect the participation of communities of color in studies have been identified, including elements of study design, logistical problems, low levels of health literacy, socio-cultural factors, and specific attitudes that hinder research participation. However, mistrust of academic and research institutions and investigators has been reported as the most significant attitudinal barrier to research participation reported by communities of color. Its cause stems from historic events, but is also exacerbated by more current actions, including socioeconomic and healthcare system inequities. The City of St. Louis Department of Health recognizes that we must acknowledge the past and more current harms that have been caused by research conducted on communities of color. We also understand that in order to establish trust, we must be transparent, honest, and consistently engage communities of color in a culturally sensitive manner. There's no better time than the present to effectively engage the communities we are charged to serve and protect. The primary goal for this session is to provide you with accurate information so you can make informed decisions about you and your family's health. We also have a couple of housekeeping rules before we get started. A couple of housekeeping notes about tonight's discussion. If you're joining us on Zoom, you may use the Q&A option on your screen. Please feel free to use that, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible following the presentation. Joining me tonight is Kevin McKinney, the Executive Director of the St. Louis Association of Community Organizations. Kevin, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Echols. SLACO looks to create and drive conversations on community policing, racial equity, and tonight, ways to move forward in the COVID-19 pandemic through the creation of a COVID-19 vaccine. We are delighted to have Dr. Sharon Frey and Dr. Rochelle Presti joining us tonight. They are going to lead the COVID-19 vaccine research right here in the city of St. Louis at their respective universities. Dr. Sharon Frey is the clinical director of the Center for Vaccine Development at St. Louis University.
And as you mentioned, also joining us is Dr. Rachel Presti, the medical director of the Infectious Diseases Clinical Research Unit at Washington University School of Medicine. Thank you both for your time tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Echols and Mr. McKinney, for the invitation to speak to this SLACO members and guests today. It is our pleasure to be able to present COVID-19 vaccine-related information to the group. I think what we'll do is then present the slides next, and we want to again remind you that there is a Q&A box for you to enter questions that we can answer for everyone. So please don't be shy and let us know what your concerns are, what your questions are, so we can answer them for you. Next slide, please. So this is the agenda for this evening. We'll begin by talking about Operation Warp Speed. This is a term that everyone has heard in the news and raises antennae for some people, so we want to address Operation Warp Speed. We will also be talking about the COVID Vaccine Prevention Network, which is a network that was formed for the COVID vaccine trials, and we'll discuss that in some detail. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the vaccine studies and what they are, and also about the study safety and oversight pieces that are of interest to everyone who may consider participating in their trials. Also, we'll move to a local epidemiology just to set the stage for the St. Louis area. We will then move to mistrust and disparity among communities that are concerned about research, if you will, injustice or abuse. And then also talk a lot about vaccine outreach. Next slide. So let's start with Operation Warp Speed and what are the goals of Operation Warp Speed. Again, this name has raised some concern in the community because of the speed and the concern that may affect the safety of testing products. So we would like to address that somewhat throughout the presentation. So the goals are multiple. What Operation Warp Speed seeks to do is to produce and deliver 300 million doses approximately of safe and effective vaccines, with the initial doses hopefully being available by January 2021. And again, even though they might be available, they would not be used unless the vaccine is found to be efficacious or that the vaccine works. I will say that right now that we hope there's more than one vaccine that will be available that is effective, so that there's more opportunity to vaccinate more people in different situations. Another goal is to accelerate the development, manufacturing, and distribution of the COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics and diagnostics. This is all part of Operation Warp Speed's goals. And also they want to accelerate development while maintaining the standards for safety and efficacy. And we will again get into that some more. So who is behind Operation Warp Speed? Operation Warp Speed is a combined effort of the Departments of Health and Human Services, which we all know, and the Department of Defense, which we are also all very familiar with. Both of these departments we love. We're glad we have them. Who makes up the individual components of this? This is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. You've heard about them a lot since COVID started. Also the Food and Drug Administration group, which is the FDA. These are the people who must give final approval for any product that is available, that will be available, whether it's fully approved or whether it's approved for emergency use. The FDA needs to sign off on that. The National Institutes of Health, which you'll hear about more, but these are the biggest funders of any kind of research in the United States, any scientific research rather. And also the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA, which you probably have not heard about that much, but has been in the news. And they're tasked with pandemic preparedness. And COVID is an example. COVID vaccines, COVID treatments are an example of pandemic preparedness, and they're tasked with advancing the research, getting the research done, helping with development, funding some of these processes so we can move quickly. They also, you may be aware, have been funding pandemic flu vaccine studies, which we also do in St. Louis. Next slide, please. So what is the COVID-19 Prevention Network? This is fondly called the Co-Vpn. The Co-Vpn is a group of individual research units that are funded by the NIH through the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And both Dr. Presti and I work in units that are the elite units that are funded by the NIAID, who are participants of or principals in the Co-Vpn. Now, you're aware of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases because this institute is one of many institutes of the NIH, but this particular institute, you will like to know, is directed by Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's in the news all the time, and he is a well-renowned and well-respected scientist. What is the mission of the Co-Vpn? It's to conduct phase 3 efficacy trials for prevention of infection and prevention of COVID disease. And this is not only vaccine trials, it's also antibody or monoclonal antibody trials and other trials. So we will speak about that a little bit more. So the Co-Vpn expects to open up 4 phase 3 efficacy trials by the end of the year. And efficacy trials are basically the very large trials that actually look to see whether a vaccine works or it doesn't work. And if it works, how well does it work? Does it work 30% of the time? Does it work 70% of the time or 90% of the time? Obviously, the higher the percentage, the better. We also anticipate more trials after these first 4 phase 3 trials start. We anticipate there will be quite a few more trials after that, actually. So each study is anticipated to enroll at least 30,000 individuals. The Astrazeneca trial is enrolling 44,000 across the globe. The Janssen trial, I believe, is going to enroll 60,000 people across the globe. So these are big undertakings. And the vaccine studies will provide vaccine or placebo, and we'll talk about that more. So not everybody in the vaccine trial will actually get vaccine product. Some people will get placebo, and we'll again talk about that some more. Next slide, please. So the Co-Vpn network has done some other studies, and we're just going to mention this here briefly because we told you they were doing vaccine trials, but also treatment trials. And one of the studies, or one type of study that you're going to hear about are the monoclonal antibody studies. And these are being done, these are antibodies that will kill the virus or neutralize the virus. And these studies will be done in people in households who have been in contact with some other individual in the household who has been infected with COVID, or similarly in nursing homes, to see if we can protect people in nursing homes who have either developed disease from having worse disease, but also to prevent disease or infection in other individuals in the nursing homes. They also are studying some drugs that you have heard about. The Remdesivir study was one of their studies. That was the ACT trial #1, and then 2 and 3 are looking at immunomodulators. These are drugs that work to lessen a immune response that would be detrimental to an individual. For example, would lessen cytokine storm should a person have a bad reaction or worse reaction rather to COVID than others. Next slide, please. So here we have a picture of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The SARS-CoV-2 virus is the virus that causes COVID disease. And what you see when you look at the diagram on the left is a picture of the virus. And you'll see in the very inside, there's these squiggly red lines. These squiggly red lines are the RNA. This is an RNA virus. And the RNA is important, and I'll mention that a little bit later when we talk about the Moderna study. But you also see the spike protein sticking outside of the virus. Now, these viruses, the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the other coronaviruses, are called coronaviruses because of all the spikes that are sticking out. It looks like a crown, and that's what corona means. It means a crown. So we have a crown of spike proteins that are sticking outside of the virus. And those spike proteins are important to us because these are the proteins that are represented in probably all the vaccines, if not most of the vaccines. And why is that important? Because that spike protein, which is represented even in a more definitive way in the right side figure, which is a little bit hard for us to understand, but that spike protein attaches to the cells in the body using what's called the ACE2 receptor. So the spike protein meets with the ACE2 receptor, and then it's taken up into the cells through a mechanism by attaching to the receptor and then moving into the cells. The spike proteins are what allows the virus to infect cells, and this is what causes havoc in the body. And many of the vaccines, again, are made using that spike protein because we know that the neutralizing antibody, the major neutralizing antibody for this virus, is made against that spike protein. Next slide, please. So what are the vaccine studies that are currently being done through the Co-Vpn? Now, remember that the Co-Vpn is just basically it's a group of the NIH-sponsored units that do vaccine trials. They are a part of all the sites that are doing trials. We may be 20 or 30 sites compared to an entire trial, which may use 100 sites or many more across the globe to work on these trials. But we are a major academic force and we are leaders in the field. So that's why we're important for these studies. So the first study that was started was the Moderna trial, and this is an RNA vaccine. And remember, I talked about RNA and that spike I'm sorry, in the coronavirus in the center, those blue squiggly lines were RNA. So this study, this vaccine uses mRNA, which carries the code for making the spike protein into the muscle of the arm. When we inject the arm, we're injecting mRNA. And that mRNA provides instructions to the cell about how to make its own spike protein. And then the body will attack that spike protein and make an immune response to it and make a strong antibody response to that spike. That antibody response then is what will help kill the virus should the person become infected. So this is a 2-dose study. The doses are given 28 days apart, and half the people in the study are going to be randomized to vaccine, and the other half will be randomized to placebo. So everyone has a 50-50% chance of getting either vaccine or placebo in this study, and this study is only a domestic study being done in the United States. The next study that was started was the Astrazeneca study. This is a unique study. It is using a vaccine called adenovirus. Adenoviruses cause common colds. I will say that this particular adenovirus is weakened, is attenuated, and it's a chimp adenovirus. It also is given as 2 doses, 28 days apart. And in this case, people will be randomized 2-to-1. So every 2 out of 3 people will receive vaccine, 1 out of 3 people will receive placebo. And this is an international study, including the US and many other sites abroad. The next study that has started is the Janssen study. This also is an adenovirus vaccine, and the adenovirus vaccine here is a human adenovirus. It is a one-dose trial, and here individuals are randomized 1-to-1 such that you have a 50% chance of receiving vaccine or placebo. This again is an international study. I do want to step back and say that there are 4 coronavirus that circulate normally in the United States and across the world, and these are called simple colds. We do have 3 coronaviruses, and SARS-CoV-2 is one of those that causes very severe respiratory disease. Next slide. So who's going to be recruited in these studies? We are recruiting adults of all ages, 18 years and older, into these studies. And we are also interested in enrolling people who are elderly, including people who have underlying diseases or comorbidities such as heart disease, lung disease, diabetes, hypertension. We particularly would like the disadvantaged populations to participate in these trials so they have fair representation, so that we know that the vaccines work in all populations and not just some populations. And Dr. Presti will talk about this some more, but the disadvantaged populations who are suffering the most are the Black populations, the Latinx, and the Native American populations. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide that I'll do, and then Dr. Presti will pick up from here. So what is the safety oversight for these studies? The studies have a lot of safety oversight, and the first thing we do whenever we vaccinate somebody or give them placebo or give them vaccine, whatever the case may be, I should say whenever we inject somebody, is that we keep them at the unit for a period of time to make sure they're feeling okay when they leave. And we teach them how to use an electronic diary card, and then they will track any problems or side effects that they might have for a period of 7 to 14 days after each vaccination. Then we follow them very closely for 28 days after each vaccination to see if they might have some other side effect that we didn't think they might have. Now, when I say we have them keep a diary card, we're interested to know local side effects and systemic side effects. In other words, if I put a vaccine in your arm, just like with a flu vaccine, I want to know if you have pain or tenderness at that site, if you have redness or your arm feels stiff. I want to know if you feel feverish, have aches and pains, maybe a headache, or anything else that might go on. And I want to know how severe it is, if it's just mild or moderate, which most side effects are. Almost all the side effects are either mild or moderate. But I also need to know, is that side effect severe? And if it is, how severe is it? And we need to track that and follow people very closely. Then we follow them for a period of 2 years. And in these studies, most of the studies will require that people complete a diary card every week. And we will be calling them every week to see how they're doing. But importantly, we want to know if they have developed COVID or not, or been exposed to COVID or not, so we can determine whether or not that vaccine is actually working when we compare it to the placebo recipients. The so when we do a study, the institutional review board at each institution has to carefully review whether that study looks safe enough to do in humans. In other words, does the risk benefit favor high benefit, low risk for a person to be in that study? Also, the National Institutes of Health have a variety of oversight levels that for them to follow how people are doing in the study. There is a safety monitoring board that follows the side effects to any study very closely. And these are the people who can stop a study and say, hey, we got to sit back here now and take a better look at this particular side effect in this particular individual to make sure we don't think it's related to the drug. Every study has medical monitors that we can call, or they call us as often as needed to make sure things are going well. And then all people who participate in studies, staff or physicians or what have you, even the lab people, everybody has to take good clinical practice training. And this good clinical practice training is based on the Belmont Report for Ethical Principles and Guidelines for the Protection of Human Subjects of Research. And we can come back and talk about that more if one would like. I do want to remind people to put questions in the Q&A box at this time. And I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Presti.
Thank you, Sharon. It's a pleasure to speak to you. And I saw that to speak to the group. There are a couple of questions in there. I think it may be easiest if we take the questions at the end. I started to try to answer the first one and then realized I was going to get distracted. So in general, to get vaccines that work in the populations that need them the most, we just need significant community outreach. It's critically important to reach communities that are being disproportionately affected by COVID-19, both in terms of the numbers of people being infected, so the incidence and the number of people getting sick and how sick they're getting, and most importantly, the people who are dying from this. So because of that, it's really, really important that the research efforts that we have put in place are accessible to essential workers, to older adults who are at highest risk of dying from COVID-19, and to Black and Latinx and Native American populations that are at much higher risk of both getting COVID-19 and dying from it. Because of that, I just want to acknowledge now the outreach efforts that have been going on. And these are really partnerships, which have been wonderful. There's not a whole lot good that can come out of COVID-19, but some of the connections that I think we've been able to make between Washington University and St. Louis University and the health departments, public health schools at both universities, the community, especially people who are willing to talk to us on community advisory boards at the universities, individual researchers who are used to and have a lot of experience working with disadvantaged communities, working with older communities have been really fantastic. And then the community resources, and I've just listed some of them here. There are tremendous community groups in the St. Louis area that are working to improve health and equity in our region. There are medical community forums that we've had the opportunity to talk to and are setting up meetings with in order to get information out to medical personnel that are trusted in their communities, and so that they know what we are doing and they can pass along accurate information to their patients. We've also made several connections with local religious leaders, as well as local media. And then there are significant national efforts to get the word out on the vaccines. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that there is significant mistrust, and a lot of that is due to significant disparity in the populations that have been most impacted by COVID-19. So I think there are well-known significant health disparities for people of color that have been exposed and really amplified by what we're seeing with the COVID-19 pandemic. There is a long history of problematic clinical care and research in people of color and other disadvantaged populations that is, both in the St. Louis area, in the US, and throughout the world, and that has resulted in mistrust. Our intent now is to acknowledge this and recognize this as a significant problem, to listen to the community and learn from you about understanding what we can do to help and move forward. Because I think the one tragedy of this is, or there are multiple, but one of the compounding tragedies is poor treatment in the past has resulted in mistrust that is resulting in a lack of good information about how best to treat populations, and lack of access to clinical trials that are really necessary to know how to treat people better. We wanted to provide you information about COVID vaccines, and Sharon has done a great job in covering a lot of that, especially to include some of the details about the safety oversight, so that people are aware that we are not skimping corners on safety in developing these vaccines. So, and then really we would like to offer the opportunity to participate in the research studies. But even if people don't want to participate in the research studies, to let people know how we're conducting these, so that when we do find a vaccine that is safe and effective and is approved by the FDA, once the scientists have completely vetted it, that people are willing to take that vaccine, because we can get the best vaccine in the world. If nobody takes it, it won't help us at all. This is really just a snapshot of what had been going on in the St. Louis area, and I just like the way it was put together. But I do think it really does emphasize the disparities in deaths among different populations. And so the red box there on the left is showing that we see a much higher rate of death per population in Black and African Americans in the St. Louis area when compared to white or other racial groups. And then just as sort of striking, we also are seeing much higher rates of death in older populations, shown there on the right. As people get older, they are more likely to die from COVID-19. So that is really why we're trying to study the vaccines in these populations, so that we know that they work in the populations that are most at risk. So why do we need to recruit those? So a lot of times people say, well, I don't want to be a guinea pig for white people. And I guess what I would say is we're trying to turn that around a little bit and say, well, a lot of times the white people have already been the guinea pigs. So for this particular vaccine. So the vaccines thus far have been tested predominantly in young, healthy Caucasian populations. So the initial safety, the phase 1 and phase 2 studies, those initial safety studies that have been done on these vaccines were done predominantly in Caucasian populations. We need fair, equitable representation in these really large efficacy studies to make sure that the vaccines work and they're safe in everyone. So why couldn't we just test these in white people and approve them for everybody? We think that they would work, but there are differences in underlying risk, there are differences in exposures, there's different rates of progression to severe disease. And so it's really important that we make sure that we have tested these vaccines in a representative population of the people who are at highest risk of getting COVID-19. So what's the risk if we don't enroll broadly? So one of the easiest things to note is that it might take longer to develop vaccines. So to get a vaccine that is efficacious, so we could test safety in a bunch of people, and you know, you just need to know if the vaccine is safe and people don't have significant side effects from it. But to get efficacy, what we need is we need to see that there are more people in the placebo arm that get COVID or that get sick from COVID than people in the vaccinated arm. That's the only way you can tell if it works. And if we don't test the vaccine in people who are already likely to get sick, then it may take longer. If it takes longer to have people exposed and getting sick from COVID-19, then it will take longer to find out which vaccines work. So we also are concerned if we don't recruit people broadly that we might miss something that is unique about certain populations. So I think that's part of the reason why we really want to make sure that we are testing the vaccines in populations that are at the highest risk of COVID-19, because they're the most likely to benefit from the vaccine. And then they're most likely to recognize then that the vaccine works in their population. It works in people who are like them. And I think that's really, really important to improve uptake of the vaccines. So we put together some questions, and I know Dr. Echols has available a list of more detailed answers to a lot of these questions. So, you know, we've talked to you already about what we're doing. We're doing phase 3 studies that are testing safety and efficacy of the vaccines. You know, people ask about whether or not they're a guinea pig. I actually don't know where that term came from. We very rarely do research on guinea pigs, but the vaccines have been shown to be safe in preliminary studies, and they've been shown already that they generate antibody and T-cell immune responses against that spike protein on the virus. So they've already been tested in hundreds to thousands of people. So we think from that preliminary data that the vaccines are generally safe, but we really need to test it in a larger population to confirm that there aren't rare reactions, and most importantly, to confirm that they work, that there's a benefit to getting the vaccine. We do get asked if you can get COVID from the vaccine, and absolutely not. So when Dr. Frey was talking to you about how these vaccines are made, the only part of COVID of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that is in any of these vaccines is either that RNA or protein that makes the spike protein. The whole rest of the coronavirus is not anywhere near the vaccines. It's never been anywhere near the vaccines. They're not just attenuated SARS-CoV-2. They're not even an entire SARS-CoV-2 virus. They're just a little tiny piece of it. And we absolutely are not exposing participants to COVID as part of these studies to test to see whether or not the vaccines work. We are looking for people who, despite all of their best efforts, are being exposed because they are essential workers, because of what they do in their communities, because of what they do in their work. We want people to use masks. We want people to social distance as much as they can, but clearly people in the US are still getting infected, and we are using that natural infection to test the vaccines. So there are some studies that people have proposed that are challenge studies where they would get challenged with SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, but those are not these vaccine studies. So, and then just why should you participate? You know, this is the one way that we can come up with to really contribute to your community to get past this pandemic, to help find a vaccine that will help life get back to normal. So Dr. Frey also talked a little bit about the safety measures that are in place. But we get a lot of times questions about whether or not we're going too fast. And that, that's the Operation Warp Speed leads to that kind of question because of the name of it. So, and it's true, most vaccines take years to develop. But most diseases are not pandemic diseases, so this is really an unusual situation to have a pandemic that is affecting the entire world. So how do you speed up making vaccines? Money is a big part of it. So most companies, when they set out to start a vaccine study, they start with an idea about a well-known infection that they would like to target. So influenza, or the common cold, or measles, or tuberculosis. So they have a disease and they have an idea about how we might protect against it, how the immune system might be able to protect against it. And they do some research. They do these small phase 1 studies, but they need to get money to do those phase 1 studies. So they need that funded. And then they need to see, does it look like a good response? And then they need to get more money. And they need to plan for a phase 2 trial. And then after that, they need to get a lot more money and usually need to partner with a big pharmaceutical company to get it to a phase 3 trial. And that's part of the reason why these things take a long time. So the fact that there's just a lot of money available to move these vaccines through as soon as they look like they're promising allows us to do this a little bit more quickly. Also having a lot of the NIH involved in planning these trials, in coming up with what is good study design. Can we use the same kind of study design across multiple different vaccine studies is helpful. So the other thing that you do to speed it up is a numbers game. So you need events. So we need COVID-19 in the placebo group that is at higher rates than in the vaccine group. So you can get those numbers by waiting longer, or you can get those numbers by having more people involved in the studies. And so, so that's actually important too. And then this is all an industry and academic partnership. So the Co-Vpn is the network that Dr. Frey and I are part of. That is an academic network that's been funded, that's made up of research units that have been funded for over 30 years, doing other infectious disease work, doing vaccine work, doing HIV work, doing other infectious disease work. And utilizing those has been really helpful for two reasons. One, the very experienced people at conducting clinical trials. But the other is that a lot of those academic groups care a lot about doing the trials in a way that that involves the community. And so, so we have already community partnerships. We have community advisory boards and so on that can advise us on what's the best way to talk to people about doing a vaccine study. What are the best practices in terms of conducting the vaccine study? So there was concern with the Mrna Vaccine study initially with not recruiting enough minorities and people of color to that study. And the Co-Vpn really came in and increased recruitment of minority populations and have really made that study much improved in terms of making sure that we are recruiting people across a broad spectrum. So, and then the other thing is there's a lot of competition. Everybody wants a COVID-19 vaccine. It's very unusual that you have, multiple different companies and academic groups around the world all trying to make a vaccine against the same thing at the same time. So there are over 150 vaccines in development, which means we can pick and choose which ones look the best, which ones are the safest, which ones give you the best immune response, and move those forward fastest. And so that's how we're trying to get things going more quickly. It's still, we're not skimping on safety. We're not skimping on any of the steps that need to be done to get a vaccine packaged through to the FDA. And I think part of what's demonstrative of that is that the Astrazeneca study has been on pause, which I think is really, it demonstrates that the safety is still of paramount importance. And so one of the participants in that study developed an unusual illness. The researchers thought it might be due to the vaccine. Per reports, it sounds like the person actually has gotten better, but they've put the study on pause until they can look in extreme detail at everybody who's ever received that vaccine or any vaccine that would be similar to it, anything else that uses that same chimp adenovirus vector. So I think that's sort of emblematic of how careful we are being. So we're not skimping on the safety steps. We're trying to move these forward quickly using other methods. So community involvement is just critically important. And, we are asking you, this is why we're talking to you, and this is why hopefully we have a great discussion about what we need to do moving forward. We want to ensure that there's fair representation in studies. We want to ensure that the vaccines are safe and that they will work for everyone so that we can get past this, so we can move on past COVID-19. So I'm going to leave this up, but I think for a little bit, this is just how you can participate. The Coronavirus Prevention Network, that Co-Vpn, has a website, coronaviruspreventionnetwork.org. And there's a registry on there where you can sign up to volunteer. You can also reach out directly to St. Louis University or Washington University, and our email and website addresses are there on the screen. So I think that's the end of the slides, really. We can move on to questions, I think. And thank you very much for participating.
Should we, Dr. Echols, do you want us just to take the questions?
Yeah, so first I just want to say thank you to Drs. Frey and Presti for that very valuable information. And so we'll start with, and we also want to thank everyone who submitted questions. Right now we have 15 questions in our in the Q&A box. And so we'll start with the first question, which is, how promising is the development of UCSF's aeronabs for the near future? Do you anticipate that this will be a common household public setting use?
I can take a stab at that, Rachel. So I really don't know much about the aeronabs. I do know that it is a product that would be inhaled or be administered intranasally on a daily basis. At least this is a concept. And the idea is that the idea is that this molecule looks like an antibody, if you will. And the idea is that it would encapsulate the virus somehow and prevent it from binding with the ACE2 receptor. And so it's not clear if it's going to be used prophylactically, or if it's going to be given to people who have been exposed but maybe not yet infected, or rather infected but not yet with disease. They refer to it as being some sort of PPE-like mechanism that might help while we are waiting for vaccines to be developed. So it's hard to say exactly where this product would go and whether it would be effective, and if so, in what populations and at what time. So I really don't have much more information about it than that.
I think
Go ahead.
I think the other thing about it is we don't know a whole lot about how it's developed. It sounds like it's actually fairly novel, so it's not related to something that's already in approved use. So it's going to need extensive safety and efficacy testing, I think, before it would be able to be administered to people at a across a wide population. I think the other question I would have is, I don't know how quickly this could be scaled up, like how easy it is to make this, and that's actually one of the problems I think we're going to have with the monoclonal antibodies. So we've been doing studies with monoclonal antibodies, both in patients who are hospitalized, in people who are outpatients who have gotten COVID, and then in people who've been exposed to COVID. And so there's preliminary data that those look like they might work in all of those settings potentially. The real problem with it is that monoclonal antibodies are not easy to make to scale at high rates. It's actually quite a bit of work for sort of manufacturing. And so the extent to which you could give monoclonal antibodies to 8 million people to treat COVID or prevent COVID is not clear that is something that we could scale. So that would be my question about these aeronavs as well, is how much could you actually make of it? And how would you get that out to people?
Okay, we got another question here. Says, we have heard nothing about how the rollout of this vaccine will be done equitably in Black and Brown populations. What specific plans are there around this? How are you addressing mistrust based on documented history of systematic and structural racism? I think you did kind of touch on that a little bit, Dr. Presti, but do you guys want to elaborate on that anymore?
I would just, go ahead, Rachel.
I was actually going to see if Dr. Echols could elaborate on this. This is, so what Dr. Frey and I are doing are the vaccine studies, and that's to identify, to find the vaccine. And then the rollout of the vaccines is an implementation issue. And so that actually is something that I know people are working on, and particularly the CDC has asked state and local health departments for their plans on how to do that. So Dr. Echols, I don't know if you would be able to comment on that more.
Yeah, so the racial and health equity piece is a major priority for the City of St. Louis Department of Health. And so as we work out the logistics and work out the communication between the City of St. Louis and the State Health Department, that will remain a priority because we want to make sure our most vulnerable populations, which include those who are underinsured, uninsured, and those living in high poverty, have the same access to those individuals who have medical insurance. And so this is a priority for the City of St. Louis Department of Health, and we are incorporating the racial and health equity piece into our planning efforts.
Yeah, and I would just like to add that as far as discussing these kinds of concerns, Dr. Echols has been very active and has invited us to talk to faith leaders, to talk to the Board of Public Health and Hospitals, to come here and talk to the SLACO group. We've had, as Dr. Presti mentioned earlier, interactive with a lot of individuals in the community, such as CABs, and have requested advice from all these various groups on what can we do to improve access for people, and what kinds of boots on the ground efforts can we make. I will tell you that the Moderna trial, which is coming to an end this week, absolutely in the last 3+ weeks has cut off all white people being enrolled into studies because they were not happy. The government wasn't happy. The company wasn't happy with the number of people from minority groups who had participated. So we had more outreach events to try to encourage people to engage in conversations. I would have to say that St. Louis area is well represented. We were extremely pleased with the turnout of folks coming out. And so efforts are being made. And as far as health disparity, when people come to us, we ask them, where did you get your health care? How can we help you find somebody? If they have an event that we think might be related to a vaccine, we refer them for a special consult and care. We also have been working with the Integrated Health Network to help us have people who would like to hook up with a doctor or healthcare provider, help them connect with someone, and it doesn't matter if they have insurance or they don't have insurance. The Integrated Health Network has been working with us to make those connections, and not just us at SLU, but also I think at WashU too. So there's a lot of efforts that we have been making, and I think COVID, unfortunately or unfortunately, has COVID has a lot of bad things about it, but it has a lot of wonderful things that are people are working together, they're interacting, they're finding solutions, and I think that is one of the bright, good things about the COVID pandemic.
Good deal. Good deal. One other question here. Let's see. Isn't there an issue about potential additional vulnerability from the adenovirus-based vaccine for HIV? Somebody said they read that.
Yeah, so there have been many vaccine trials for HIV. We're obviously still struggling with that one. But one of the studies used an adenovirus 5, type 5 vector for one of the HIV vaccine studies. And that's an adenovirus, and Dr. Frey mentioned that causes sort of common cold. That's an adenovirus that is actually fairly common in the population. And what was seen is people who had immune responses to that adenovirus, actually, it seemed like the vaccine did the opposite of what you would want it to do, and it increased the risk in those folks of acquiring HIV. So it was thought to be some unusual immune mediated enhancement of HIV infection. So somehow you developed an immune response that allowed the virus to get in and cause infection faster. So the vaccine studies that are being done with adenovirus vectors, the Astrazeneca one and the Janssen one, are not with that adenovirus 5 vector. One is with a chimpanzee adenovirus, so people would not have antibodies to that, would not have an immune response to that before. And the other, the Janssen one, is a human adenovirus, but it's a very rare one that hasn't that very few people have immune responses to. And so we're hoping that was just an unusual thing that happened in that particular HIV vaccine study. But we've sort of taken steps to try to avoid that sort of thing happening in these vaccine studies.
The next question is, please explain the Belmont study and how it will be used in this study.
This is Sharon. So the Belmont report is called the Ethics Principle and Guidelines for Protection of Human Subjects of Research. It was one of the early and still ongoing reports that is referred to and is updated from time to time, I will say, as is referred to when we talk about the injustice of research that has been done in the past. People may be familiar with the Nuremberg Trials. The Nuremberg Trials were trials against war crimes, including those that exploited unwilling prisoners of war as research subjects and some heinous things that they did. But it also speaks to the injustice of the taking advantage, or the injustice of the Tuskegee trial. We're familiar with that. The syphilis trial talks of the injustice of that and the taking advantage of disadvantaged rural Black men who, when during the trial, did not receive a treatment for syphilis that they should have received when it became available, and that did not happen. And that is an example of the ethical principles that the Belmont report speaks to. And this is part of the good clinical practice training that all researchers, regardless of whether they're physicians, staff, or nurses, or whatever they may be, anybody who participates as a worker in these trials, must take institutional review board training, and they must take good clinical practice training. And these good clinical practice trainings is all about the ethics, if you will, and the safety of the subject or the volunteer.
Cool.
So yeah, so that includes things like making sure people know exactly what is being asked of them in the trials, what exactly we're going to do. And, we give you all that information before you even agree to participate in the study. We tell you what your alternatives are. We tell you what the risks might be of participating in the study and what the potential benefits would be. So we try to give you as much information as possible about what we expect from the study, why we're doing the study, what we know about the risks and benefits of the study, and exactly what we're asking you to do. And then it is always absolutely completely legitimate for a study participant to decide they don't want to do the study, and they can decide that at any time. So you can stay on a study for a week and decide you don't want to do it anymore. That is absolutely always your right. So we want to make sure that people know what all of their rights are in participating in a clinical trial. So.
Yeah, so we consider consenting, no procedure or anything is done to somebody until they sign the consent form, and they cannot sign the consent form until we thoroughly explain to them what's in that consent form and make sure we've answered all their questions. And we consider consenting an ongoing process throughout the entire trial. And as Dr. Presti said, it is the right of the volunteer to drop out of a study whenever they want. And if you come in for consenting to see about the study, if you decide there, I'm not doing this is crazy, I'm out of here, that's good for good. It's a good thing that you can do that, and you should feel free to do that.
Okay, I'll give you one more here. We got 14 left. Hopefully we can run through a few.
Okay, we'll do this
Okay,
faster.
Well, that was good though. That was very good. I'm not saying some of the vaccine trials were temporarily halted. What are the reasons trials may be delayed?
So those are actually all sort of written into the protocols, the underlying reasons. The main reason that a trial would be halted is that something happened to someone in the study, and oftentimes they might be in the placebo arm, so we don't even know whether or not they had gotten the vaccine or not. But something happened. They were something happened. They got in the hospitalized. They had some adverse event, something like that. That's the main reason. There may also be sort of regulatory reasons if something unusual happens, or there's some concern about the production of the vaccine. That's much less common. It's usually something has happened to a participant, and that it's sort of like on a manufacturing line, you stop the line. If there's any question, if there's any concern, you stop the line and then you figure out what's going on, and you let people know we need to hold on this and until we figure it out. So.
Yeah, and I would just add to that very briefly. When we collect side effects, or what we call adverse events, we collect all of them, whether we think they're related to the product or not. If you break your leg because you were doing something, I don't know, you crashed your motorcycle or something, that is an adverse event. That is a serious adverse event. And all those things get collected. And the reason they get collected is because there may be something that you don't think is plausible to be related to the vaccine. But when the safety people go through and do the analysis of all the safety data, they may see a trend with something that you thought may not really be related to the vaccine. And it turns out, well, it might be. So it's these kinds of things are very important from a safety point of view, and a study halt.
So just for an example, I know you used riding a motorcycle and you break your leg. So if that happened and a person didn't get well, or something happened to them, they could relate that back to, say, broken bones or things like that can deter this. Is that what you're saying?
Not quite sure what you're asking me.
I think maybe you're saying like, if we notice that people are, there's a whole lot more fractures in the arm that got the vaccine versus the placebo,
Yeah.
then you might start thinking, well, is there something, are we doing something with this in this study that winds up thinning people's bones so they're more likely to break them even with, so yeah, that people would go back and look at that. That I suppose that's the other thing that I didn't mention, but there are sort of frequent meetings of the data safety monitoring boards. So a study might also get put on hold if something like that happened. So not for an individual person getting sick, but if they see a trend, either that, say, for example, there are more people getting sick in the vaccine arm than the placebo arm from something, even if we didn't think any of those were particularly related.
Yeah, and the reason these trials are randomized to receipt of product is because of this kind of question that you asked, Mr. McKinney. So if people are randomized, and this is done by computers, and they don't know what study group they're in, we don't, none of the staff knows what study their group they're in. We don't know if they received vaccine. We don't know if they received placebo. But if people are equally randomized, they should have similar non-related events in the placebo arm as the vaccine arm, because this is the purpose of randomizing, that things would be somewhat equal in that regard. And then we look for things that are not the same or not somewhat equal in each and start analyzing that information.
With you. Okay, let's look at another question here. At least one story said research on previous viruses like H1N1, Ebola also gave us a jump start on COVID-19 virus research. Is that correct?
That's true, particularly with the with some of the adjuvanted vaccines, or particularly with the mRNA vaccine. mRNA was used as a platform or a type of vaccine, if you will, for Ebola and I think for MERS. And so these platforms, the mRNA platform is very easy to make. It was used to make some of these vaccines. The problem with the vaccines were those diseases were not around long enough or in enough individuals to actually test the vaccine in those cases. So the mRNA platform is easy to produce. It's easy to make, and it's been used as a platform for other vaccines. And so it was an easy thing, or I shouldn't say easy, but it was easier than most vaccines to just take the spike protein and use it with the mRNA platform.
So a lot of the research on SARS and MERS, even though it didn't wind up with a vaccine, the preliminary research on those vaccines helped. And then I know the Ebola vaccine that was licensed by Janssen is using the same technology for their potential SARS vaccine.
Okay, what are the costs associated with the vaccine development, distribution, and administration?
Huge. It's huge. There are millions and millions of dollars, millions, and I can't
probably,
even.
Yeah, probably billions. Yeah.
It is billions actually, and that's about all I can say. It is mind-boggling.
Okay, we'll go on. Let's see. What about for those with health conditions that prevent them from getting vaccines with live viruses? Will a COVID-19 vaccine use dead or live viruses? I think you touched on this before, but go ahead.
Go ahead, Rachel.
So the three that we're talking about right now, we don't know that there might be one that's developed using live virus, but the three that we talked about, the Moderna, Astrazeneca, and Janssen ones, are all they're all dead. They're not replicating vectors. They're not replicating infections. So they would be considered sort of dead viruses.
And then Yeah. So one of the beauties of having so many products available is that different vaccines may work better in different populations. For example, if you just look at flu vaccine, the intranasal vaccine works better in children than it does in adults, and it's a beautiful thing because then the kids don't have to get shots. But in the elderly population, we like to give a very high dose of vaccine so they can have enough antigen or vaccine to make a stronger antibody response than they would with a normal dose. And so different types of vaccines have the potential to work better in different populations.
All right, with a campaign, you guys are doing well too. Go ahead, Doctor. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
So trying to piggyback on the previous question that was asked. So it costs billions of dollars to do the R&D for a lot of these vaccines, but now we're able to actually expedite the course for getting approval for these vaccines. Can you talk about how funding during an emergency allows us to kind of fast track the studies and production of vaccines?
Well, I can't really talk about the details of how it's done, other than that I know that the government is pouring in billions of dollars because they want people back to work. They want people to be able to gather. They want the economy to start churning again. There's so many reasons why having a vaccine to prevent COVID is helpful, not only for mental health, physical health, economy, school, you name it. And so they're pouring money into this because they want to get the job done as soon as possible. It is only being done to speed up the distribution of product. The distribution of product and the production of product can take a very long time. It can take years to be able to have enough product to go around. And it takes a huge amount of effort to distribute product. And I can send product to every state in the United States and every country across the world. But if I can't get that product to the towns, to the villages, to the clinics, it does me no good. And so this effort is to have this stuff distributed, at least at the regional level, early on, with plans on how, and Dr. Echols, you know this well, that how are you going to distribute these products to the various clinics and get the people vaccinated? And that takes a long time and it takes a lot of money to do. And the sooner you get
people,
it done.
right? So you have to pay people. You need to pay for the people who are working in the labs. You need to pay for the building blocks of making the vaccines, the cells that are needed to grow up different components, the media that you use for the cells, and then you need to pay the researchers and the research staff, and to enroll that many people that quickly. Everybody needed to hire more people to be able to conduct the studies and so on. So that's where a lot of that money is going.
Okay, and for this emergency, a lot of these monies are being provided by the federal government, which has removed a lot of the barriers that would otherwise result in a much longer pipeline for these vaccines to go through.
All right, would a campaign for educating underrepresented populations, encouraging diverse recruitment for vaccine trials be a good strategy?
Well, that's part of what we're doing right now, right? So I think we think education is really, really key. And education is not, hopefully it's not just us talking, but the kind of dialogue that is really helpful. And I feel like I'm learning a lot from the people who ask questions as much as I think I'm giving information.
And a lot of this education is done by word of mouth. I mean, we talk to all the volunteers that come in. How did you hear about this study? Why do you want to participate in this study? Usually it's for altruistic reasons. People feel like they want to do their part. They feel like they need to get out there and do something, so they feel like they've done something, because they feel sometimes helpless, because what can they do against a pandemic? And one of the things they can do is participate. And I will say for some of the disadvantaged populations individuals who have come in to our clinic, we talk to them, and the reasons they give us are outstanding, altruistic reasons. It's been really an incredible experience for me and for my staff.
All right, let's see if we can knock these two out at the same time. If you had the virus and recovered, do you still need to get the vaccine? And will the vaccine need to be given annually?
Those are great questions. We don't know the answers to those yet. Certainly, if the immune response to the vaccine wanes or decays, it doesn't last, the answer will probably be yes. Another question would be, does the virus mutate enough to require an annual vaccine, much like the flu virus does, or flu viruses, I should say. They mutate like crazy. So we don't know the answers to that. We do know that if you have had COVID once, you can get it again. We're starting to see some of that. So I think it's too early to tell.
Okay. All right, we're moving along pretty well, guys. You're doing great. How do you get the word out to the senior population, given the fact that senior centers all over St. Louis are closed to having them coming into the centers? How are you going to get that word out, Doc?
I think this is a question of being creative, of trying to get the word out through alternative means, through Zoom meetings and these kind of community forums and media and so on. We're having to be a little bit more creative, because you can't sort of hit the streets and hit places where people gather, because they're not gathering. So.
I think one of the ways, that Dr. Echols was helped us start was to get the message out to faith leaders. And I think that's a wonderful way. And when we spoke to the board of faith leaders, or their CAB, I should say, of faith leaders for the health department, they were very receptive about helping us share messages, for example. We also do some public press releases, or public announcements, if you will, with the newspaper, with radio, and do interviews on TV. So those are other ways.
And just part of the responsibility of the health departments, we're charged with making sure the community has accurate information. And so as we work with our community partners and stakeholders, we have to do our job, do our due diligence to make sure that the information we're providing and making available to them is accurate. And so during the COVID-19 pandemic, the City of St. Louis Department of Health, we've used multiple platforms such as this, to make sure accurate information is available to the community at large, so they can make better decisions regarding their health and well-being. The next question we have is, what is the expected duration for each of the 3 vaccine studies? And do you expect a safe, effective vaccine to be available for everyone?
Well, most of the studies are designed to last 2 years. Most of the studies will have interim analyses that will be done at intermittent times throughout the study to watch for signals of effectiveness or efficacy. And at those times, a lot of decisions will have to be made about, do we have enough data to show that this is efficacious, or do we just have a little data? And how efficacious is it? So these, we want it all to be yesterday. We all want it to be at the end of the year. We all want it to be in the middle of next year. We just don't know. And people will tell you, oh, yes, we're going to have a vaccine by first quarter 2021. We don't know that. We just don't know it. We're hopeful. We're hopeful we have at least one vaccine. We're hopeful we have more than one vaccine. But the answer is we just don't know. And to keep promising people that you're going to have a vaccine at the end of the year, you're going to have a vaccine by the end of February, doesn't really help anybody. It gets hopes up and then hopes dashed. So we have to be patient. These trials have to run their courses. and we have to make sure they're safe and they work. And as far as everyone, once there's a vaccine that actually works, we have multiple billion people across the world. If we're talking just about the United States, we have, I don't know, 350, 400 million people. We have to produce enough vaccine to get it out to everybody, and then people have to want to take it. And that's another issue. That's a whole nother conversation.
Great. So we have another question. How successful does a vaccine have to be in one of these studies for it to be considered effective?
I think that's a little variable. The FDA has put out some guidance about what they're expecting. And actually, if people are interested, the FDA does have a meeting tomorrow of the Vaccine Advisory Committee. And you can go to the FDA website and get information on that if you're interested. It's going to be televised. It's going to be available online through a teleconferencing kind of effort. So, so they're going to discuss what their expectations are for approving a vaccine, and so it's a whole advisory committee that will discuss what they want out of the vaccine.
Yeah. And so again, the bottom line is we don't know what the answer is going to be. People are hoping for a 60 or 70% efficacy. Measles vaccines is 90+% effective, but this coronavirus vaccine probably won't be that high. The efficacy probably won't be that high.
Okay, I got a question for you. We're down to 2 questions now. We're looking real well. You guys have done an excellent job. With over 150 possible vaccines in the works and the 3 different types of vaccines, how do you actually do local trials? Is there a phase 1, phase 2 trial completed now, or phase 3 trials determined? Are they on phase 3 on all of the 3 different types? So kind of break down maybe where you see everybody.
I think most trials are in the infancy, or not trials. Most vaccine development is in infancy. There are only a few trials, vaccines that are in phase 3 or going into phase 3 soon, studies. Most trials, before you do that, you have to do phase 1 and phase 2 trials. There are more trials in phase 1 and 2 situations than in phase 3 situations, but I would say the majority of the trials are probably in their infancy or still on the bench or still in animal studies. We also have to remember that places like Russia, China, maybe even India, I'm not sure, are doing phase 3 efficacy trials with their own vaccines. And we have not heard much about those.
Okay.
So local trials, and I guess we don't want to mislead people or anything. The local trials are not designed to be standalone local trials. So we're part of a large effort. So the way to get 30,000 people is to have, 300, 600 different sites, each enrolling, 500 people. So I didn't do the math on that right, but yeah.
You're okay. All right. Okay, so this is the one we're going to finish up with. What's the longest you think it'll take to find a vaccine with everyone getting it and resume life back to normal? Time estimates. Give us all a time when you think everything's going to be cool.
Rachel, I'll let you take that one.
Oh, so I work in HIV, and we've been predicting an HIV vaccine for 20 years. So I think we're not great at predicting. I think the other thing that's going to make this complicated is we don't know what's going to happen with this virus in terms of, there are seasonal coronaviruses that cause cold kind of syndromes every year, and we don't hear very much about it. And for most people, those are common cold viruses. So I think what we don't know is SARS-CoV-2, is that going to eventually wind up being another one of the seasonal coronaviruses that just sort of circulates and causes, disease occasionally, and most people get a cold once they've been exposed to it in the past, or is it going to be like the original SARS or MERS where it goes away? So, I think most of us are hoping that a year from now, there'll be either a vaccine or we'll have a better handle on treating the virus, and that it will have moved into more of a sort of seasonal kind of coronavirus. I don't know if you have other thoughts on that, Dr. Frey.
No, I agree with your idea about attenuated virus, or the virus becoming weaker, and that kind of thing. But to address when is the vaccine going to be ready and when is it going to be distributed? Actually, the HIV vaccines, they've been working on them for more like 35 years, but HIV vaccine is unique, and I would not hold this one to that standard, because that is a very tough virus. Let's say if there's a vaccine by the end of next year, there should be enough product to go around for most people in another year to 2 years or so. And that's just based on my own gut. It's not based on any science. It's not based on prediction. It's not based on politics or what you hear in the news, which keeps changing every day. First, we have to have the vaccine, then we'll talk about the distribution. We don't know when we're going to have a vaccine or how many we have. We just don't know.
I mean, I think we'll know in the next 6 months if these vaccines work. And they're two very different sort of strategies. I mean, if they work, the expectation would be if having an immune response to the spike protein works, then multiple of the vaccines should work. And I would think we would know that in 6 months or so. If we're barking up the wrong tree and this is not the right strategy, then we're back to square one again. So. And
there are a lot of other vaccine types or platforms out there. There's protein subunits, DNA. There's all kinds of vaccines that are trying to be developed, and a couple of those are going to be coming real soon hopefully to St. Louis.
Okay, we are coming to the end of the line here tonight, and we want to thank everyone who joined us for taking the time to hear about the vaccine trials and to ask great questions. You asked fantastic questions. We also want to thank Dr. Frey and Dr. Presti for the time that they were both of them spent engaged in the vaccine trials here in St. Louis, and the time they are spending to educate the community about the trials. You guys, we want to really give you guys some thanks for your work and the things that you're doing, and we really do appreciate that. And Dr. Echols, of course, we appreciate the work that you're doing here in St. Louis as well. So at this point in time, I want to just let you guys know that it's been a pleasure to be the moderator of this group. And we thank the participants who came online to visit with us. I think we got up as high as maybe 89 or 90 at one time. So we really do appreciate that. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Echols to close us out.
Excellent. Thank you. We're grateful for everyone who took time out of their schedule to attend this evening's event. And again, we can't thank Drs. Frey and Presti enough for the great work that they're doing to identify an effective and efficacious COVID-19 vaccine. And Kevin McKinney, thank you for being a great partner to the City of St. Louis Department of Health. We appreciate the great work that you're doing in the community. And for everyone that attended this session, so if you need additional information about the vaccine trials, Drs. Frey and Presti have worked with the Department of Health to create a frequently asked questions document, which is mentioned during the event. This document is available at the link that was provided in the chat box. So you can also go to the COVID-19 webpage at stlewis.mo.gov/COVID-19. We ask that you get another vaccine if you haven't already. St. Louis is starting to see cases of influenza, Please get your flu shot to protect yourself during this flu season. If you need additional information about area clinics, please visit our website at stlewis-mo.gov/health for dates and times of upcoming events. We'll also post information on our Twitter and Facebook accounts. And again, we thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening and be well.
Thanks, everybody.
Wear a mask and social distance.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, everybody. It was fun.
Thank you all. Have a good
Good.
evening.